The state of Illinois is deploying 30 peacekeepers in Chicago this Memorial Day weekend in an attempt to prevent violence through de-escalation and mediation, according to the Chicago Tribune. The newly created team of so-called street outreach workers are with the Illinois Department of Services Citywide Crisis Prevention and Response Unit and will be sent to Chicago's neighborhoods.
According to the Tribune, Memorial Day weekend is a time of year that Chicago has historically seen particularly high amounts of shootings. This undertaking also signals Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and Chicago's new mayor Brandon Johnson's attempts to address crime in the city, the Tribune writes.
I don't know how this is going to go, Amber. They really make it sound like Memorial Day weekend is a time for gang violence. And when I picture like a peacekeeper intervening with maybe a shooting that's about to happen, just like, hey guys, maybe we could talk about this, we could work this out. But actually, it seems that in Chicago, people party on Memorial Day weekend, and they party in the streets, and there's street takeovers and caravans and drifting, like a lot of car racing. And so it seems that it's more, I don't know, people are taking risks. They're being a little bit more risky in their partying style. People get hit by cars. It sounds like last Memorial Day weekend was the most violent, with 9 people dead, 42 people injured. And so they're going to tell people to take it easy, party safer, just peacekeepers walking around like, hey, remember to not hurt anybody today.
Yeah, that's a bizarre way of trying to crack down on crime. And obviously this goes beyond Memorial Day weekend. Chicago has an issue with violent crime pretty much every day of the year. I imagine also contributing to this, increase in violence over the Memorial Day weekend is the fact that you have young people out of school, not doing after-school programs, that kind of thing that typically keeps them out of trouble. They basically have free reign for 3 days. But the peacekeeper thing, I agree. I don't see how this is going to stop anything. One of my biggest issues with the defund the police movement was when they were talking about the idea of replacing police officers with mental health professionals. And like, that's all well and good. I think we should increase access to mental health services. But the idea of sending in a mental health professional to a potentially violent situation where they're going to be on their own if things escalate is just putting them in danger as well. And so this feels like the same kind of theme to me of not thinking a few steps ahead of what happens if things do go down.
Yeah, I think in the case of like the defund movement, where it's like, let's take some resources that we give to the police and give it to like social workers or mental health professionals, I think that makes sense in the cases where you have a mental health crisis and a cop shows up and doesn't know what to do, but the family doesn't know who else to call. Mm-hmm. I think that's a scenario where you should be able to call a mental health professional to come and de-escalate the situation, because that's something that the police are not trained to deal with. For this, it's like, how do we get people to party safer? Is it sending peacekeeping troops to Chicago for Memorial Day weekend? Like, that's a weird vibe. Is it riot police by another name? Like, who are these folks? What is their training? What are they actually going to do? Like, a policy is only as good as how it's implemented. Is it implemented effectively? Are people just going to be like, it's one of those peacekeeping nerds walking around. What uniform do they have on? Are they in disguise? Like, really, I want to know the logistics of how they're going to implement this.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't understand this at all. They call them street outreach workers, which sounds like they're not police officers, which is fine, I guess. I mean, I could see how if you have a bunch of police at some of these situations, it could potentially escalate things if you're talking about gang violence situations. But also, are you making sure that these street outreach workers are going to be in a safe environment? Because if they somehow end up in the fray in some of these, I guess, riot incidents, you're basically looking at these innocent people getting dragged into the muck, and that's a shame too.
Are they from the communities that they're going to be in? Like, they could be entirely lost. I think that's a big problem with how we do public safety at all in the United States. If you go to any other country, it's very clear that in a neighborhood, like the matriarchs and patriarchs of the family are making sure the kids are okay. If somebody's kid is misbehaving, someone else's parent will come outside and say, hey, what are you doing? There's more of a communal aspect to public safety there. It would make a lot more sense if the, aunties in the neighborhood would correct the behavior of kids they presumably know and grew up with and said, hey, you guys, be a little bit more safe. Like, don't hurt anybody. If there is a community meeting where they're like, hey, every year you guys do some stupid stuff, you're out drifting cars and hitting people and doing street takeovers, maybe take it easy, try and enjoy the weekend together. If you had older figures that are members of the community do that, that might be better than deploying peacekeepers from the Department of Services Citywide Prevention and Response Unit. Like, that's so disconnected from people's everyday lives.
Yeah, and especially when you're talking about the potential for gangs to be involved, if you don't understand the dynamics of that community and where the gangs operate and who has territory, then you're basically setting yourself up for a bad time and you're only going to make things worse. And I think this goes back to just a broader approach to how we deal with crime-ridden neighborhoods, which is that you absolutely have to have strong community ties, social services available. You have to have community centers, outreach programs in order to keep especially young people away from bad decisions and joining gangs. And too often it seems like we just say hands off to those places and we allow broken families, we allow people to not have after-school programs where they're staying out of trouble, and you just end up with a bunch of lost kids who either don't have anything better to do or are struggling economically, don't have a father figure, and turn to these bad situations that ends up destroying their life at such a young age.
I think that's a good point. The best response to a rise in crime is an investment in resources so that people actually have something to do after school. When I think about what I had to do as a teenager, we would get drunk in a field somewhere. Like, that's America for a lot of
dying
teenagers.
from a vodka overdose
when
in a farmer's
like,
field.
how's the sleepover going? And it's like, I'm in a field somewhere, like literally drinking Smirnoff flavored raspberry. It's just not good. That's not a childhood. That's not a life. And there's a reason that people are prone to doing dangerous things like street takeovers and caravans and stuff. And it's because maybe they don't value their life so much because they don't have a lot going on. Why? Because we haven't invested in strong communities and giving people a real career path. Like, if you want to live in a safe society, give people something to do other than street takeovers and drifting on Memorial Day weekend. It's pretty clear to me, but I don't think the peacekeepers are going to do much to prevent anything. I think, if anything, we're going to see some stories come out of this of some bad scenarios and maybe some videos of people recording on cell phones their interaction with these peacekeepers.
Yeah, and I think if you are going to go the route of trying to keep order during Memorial Day weekend and you have people who have already gotten themselves in bad situations and are committing crimes, like, Chicago does not seem to take prosecution seriously, and that leads to, I mean, the idea that there won't be any consequences if you do wrong. And we can debate over what those consequences should be, but if you aren't supporting rule of law, law and order, the idea that if you hit somebody with your car because you're drag racing, like, there should be a punishment for that. And again, a debate over like how strict that punishment should be. But it seems like repeatedly in these big cities, the prosecutors don't do their job and they just let people who have years and years of criminal behavior with no real consequences back out onto the street over and over again. And it does teach people that they're not going to have to face any real repercussions if they hurt others in their community. And I think that leads to this theme of sort of recklessness and kind of doing whatever we want.
Yeah, I think when we talk about preventing crime, a lot of people are not deterred by potential punishments. It's just not a strong deterring factor. Even when there are cases where people end up going to prison, when they're released, we don't see a strong deterrence factor from there. When we do see deterrence, it's when people receive education and training while they're incarcerated. And so if we care about our communities, if we care about preventing crime and violent things, seems to me that the investment should be in individuals, in making sure that people are actually not recidivating, and instead we're rehabilitating them and we're making them change their lives rather than having this cycle of people coming in and out of prison. I don't think the peacekeepers are going to do anything to deter crime. I think if anything, they're going to be people who are telling the police what's going on, and they'll be just extra informants on the streets.
Yeah, I'm definitely not optimistic about how this program is going to prevent violence this weekend, but fingers crossed that it does some kind of good, because clearly last Memorial Day in Chicago was a bit of a mess, to say the least.
Yeah,
but
thoughts and prayers, yeah.
Yeah, thoughts and prayers. We'll leave it there, and we'll be back with more Rising.